Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin, and this podcast is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. So marketers and sellers, we always want customer content, but marketing teams are stretched thin. We have a million jobs to do, and sometimes customer story creation kind of gets pushed to the wayside. So that's where Testimonial Hero comes in. They are a customer storytelling agency that creates both video and written content as an extension of your marketing team. And today I'm joined by AJ Bruno, who is the founder and CEO at QuotaPath, and we're talking about how no one should start a software company today. So yeah, a founder and CEO talking about how you shouldn't start a company. We also talk about how 99.9% of AI companies that have raised money are probably going to fail. And since AJ is from QuotaPath, we obviously discuss comp plans and specifically how they have this cascading effect on your entire business as you grow and scale. Hey, AJ, welcome to the show.
Dustin, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining me here. So I want to start off with an interesting one because, you're someone who founded, your current CEO of a software company. And we were talking before, you said that no one should found new software companies right now. So unpack that to me. Make it make sense.
You're going to have the rate of people just stop listening to this podcast episode is just going to be super high. Your bounce rate, that's the word I'm looking for, is going to be super high. They're like, wait, the first thing this guy's saying is software sucks. No, this is something that we've talked about previously, and I've had just thinking about what the world looks like right now in terms of SaaS, and you have all of these different disciplines. You have marketing and sales, you have product and engineering. They're all just rapidly changing and evolving to what they are. And it's not just Gen AI that's changing that. It's certainly venture capital. It's what's happening in the macro. It's how people do work. It's remote work. It's all of these things. And I think it's just really challenging for founders to start a business right now. I appreciate the phrase ignorance is bliss more than ever. And when I started my first company, I was 27 back in 2012. It was great. And I only knew what I knew. And at that time, it was just sales. So I fully went 100% in on sales. And that turned out to work out really well. In fact, I was just telling someone earlier today, we were at 10 million in ARR before we brought on our first marketer. And it was all cold call sales. The world has changed. I think founders that are curious, most founders are, founders that are really inquisitive about what business problems to solve and jobs to be done will ultimately be successful. And you always hear this tagline that 99% of startups fail. That's true, but we've had this lagging rate of failure over the last 3 years. And so that number is going to be 99.9%. I just wouldn't want to start a software company in today's environment. I'm glad to be a Series B startup, and as the founder CEO, I feel great and very optimistic about QuotaPath, but not as optimistic as you might think about the world right now.
Yeah, it's back in the day, if you had to spin up a new product, it was time consuming as well. It was a lot harder. Now, if you just want to rip off something that exists and spin up a company with how it is to build software.
But the quality of the software is terrible. That's the biggest issue, is we've just shortcutted everything. Let's plug in off the library, off the shelf, this SSO thing. Let's use Okta for this. We've got to do SOC 2 type 2. So we got to pay money to the Vantas or Dradas or Secure, whatever of the world. And so you have all of this off the shelf to stand up software, but the value propositions and the use cases are garbage. It's really, I don't know, it's a frustrating world. And then you have everyone being told, you got to create a category. And I know I listened to some of your other episodes previously. I think one of your guests said, that's not what you need to do. You just need to go out, build something that's 10x or 100x better and differentiated. True, but your differentiation becomes this green pixel is now a blue pixel. And that's our differentiation. Come on, get over it. You're not special.
Speaking of not special, we've all seen the old map of MarTech software where it zooms out, there's a billion things there. AI seems to be the new one that's like that. Every day I'm hearing about some new AI product. Most of the time when I try it, I'm honestly a little disappointed. I don't think a lot of them live up to the hype. So curious, you mentioned you probably wouldn't start a software company. It seems like everyone today wants to start an AI-based software company. So what do you think about that? Do you think there's legs there or same problem?
Same problem. If you're at the center of this, if you're the OpenAIs, if you're the CoreWeaves, if you're, of course, the NVIDIAs of the world, you're going to come out on top, but most others will fail. And that's okay. We're going to learn a lot through this process. You mentioned MarTech. That's actually funny. You mentioned that map. Scott Brinker, who's currently at HubSpot, he runs partnerships at HubSpot. And we're HubSpot Ventures company. So I talk a lot with him. He actually created that MarTech map, like back in the day. That was his map. And that was something I followed because I was a MarTech company. Trendkite, my first company, was in PR analytics and attribution. We were seeing a mass consolidation of tools in MarTech. So you had the Marketos of the world, you have the Adobe Omniture, the Tableaus, Domos, like these are all throwback marketing tools, and a lot of consolidation. And Trendkite ended up getting bought by Cision PR Newswire. So we ourselves were part of this consolidation. So we saw that. And I always thought for go-to-market, because I'm in sales tech today, that's what was going to happen. But now I'm not so sure. I do see it a little bit in the Gong and the outreaches and the sales lofts that they're consolidating in terms of forecasting and then call recording and Gen AI. And so you do have those pieces of it. But overall, I'm not so certain the consolidation happens on the AI front, because I think these are all stood up software that are not, you're not going to be buying any real technology. We know this, you're putting a wrapper on whatever API LLM you're using. That's not a new software company. So that's where I think it's really difficult to see what this turns into. And it's also why venture capital is all over the map. You definitely have companies that are 100 to 200x forward looking revenue in terms of valuation. But I think I still see a lot of founders that are in AI that are struggling to find not just product market fit, but also find their big picture and fundraise off of that big picture.
Yeah, and I think the AI stuff's going to move at different paces based on the category of vertical you're in. Like for us, we're a video company, we're keeping an eye on AI video, right? Oh shit, is this going to take over our editor's job? And AI right now can spin up the clips, but it's not so good at telling a story or figuring out anything logical, really, or creatives.
And you can tell the difference between companies that are using AI to tell the story and to have the narrative, and there's no authentic connection. The customer journey, customer life cycle, the product marketing pieces of it, that storyboard and narrative, those are all human things. You're 100% right. And I think that's across multiple different parts of organizations. You can take that for video editing just as much as you can for design, just as much as you can for sales and SDRs. CX, I think that's one area that is probably going under the biggest shift today in terms of what can and can't be replaced. And plenty of layoffs this year in tech are really hitting the CS teams harder. And at first it's going to be outsourcing and offshore. You're hearing a lot about that, but I think then that is the second phase, the third phase, which is ultimately no people in CX, and it's just Gen AI.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wasn't planning to go this route, but it's an interesting topic, I think. So, like, especially on the support side, CX, I hate AI for the most part. Like, I want to talk to a person the majority of the time, because normally the AI answer is garbage. I think it depends on what you sell and what the product is. But we're a HubSpot customer. I love HubSpot. So I would rather just talk to someone for 30 seconds on the live chat and figure my thing out. Maybe I'm a dinosaur and other people don't think like this, but
HubSpot is like a company they have a lot of people, and they haven't, even though the product, and certainly Dharmesh himself, one of the co-founders, is adopting AI in big ways and has lots of announcements at Inbound and other conferences, the company itself is still very much like a person-to-person experience. And that is how they've created their world. Inbound is like people coming to you and you want to talk to someone on the consultation, on your website grader, on what is broken in your marketing chain. And HubSpot has so many different product lines today. It's really challenging for reps at HubSpot to truly understand and encapsulate everything. So they can use AI as a co-pilot. I think Mark Roberge talked a little bit about this in a recent talk that I heard him, which is that first version of AI is really like you have a solutions engineer hanging out on a third window. There's a third Zoom, a third panel, and it's just like hanging out. And then when you call upon it, it like prompts to, and the person is like, yeah, that's technically correct, but let me turn off the recording and give you the real of what this actually does. That's what people actually genuinely connect. And I think that's how the AI application I see over the next year. It said 12 months ago, I think a lot of people would have said, oh, we'll replace, or that's what we'll get to. We're still in the early innings of this whole thing for sure.
Yeah, I like it's a supplemental co-pilot approach. I agree. I think that works well. So you mentioned obviously you're in sales tech, pretty tied closely to the revenue team and continuing to grow QuotaPath. I'm curious as someone in sales tech, I'm switching gears here. What new are you trying? What's actually working there? Because you hear a lot of noise online about using AI to send 1 billion emails. Probably don't do that. There's a lot of different ideas and suggestions on there. So I'm curious what you're focused on.
I heard Kyle Norton, he's the CRO of owner.co. He gave a really great prescriptive view on this, which is every week, sales leaders, CROs should be demoing new products that are out there in the Gen AI or in anything, like every week taking 2 to 3 demos to understand. And it's not necessarily about the product or the thing and using that tool, but it's just how you learn and how you're seeing things evolve. So I could talk to what QuotaPath is doing, but in a week from now, it's going to go out of date. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point, right? Is that we are consolidating. My VP of ops and revenue, a sales leader, Ryan Milligan, sent me a message saying like, hey, we are using these 3 tools for these 3 things. I had a terrible sales experience with the one company that can consolidate. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to look elsewhere to these things. And that is, Dustin, the really interesting thing, right? We look at all these tools, but if you still don't have a great sales experience, a human to human connection, it all falls apart. And I think that's the crux of the piece of it, is that I could again give you that these are the tools, these are the things that I'm using. And I'll call out one that you've probably heard multiple times, clay.com, because Clay gives you that both PLG experience, but also has thought leaders and thought partners on what are the best templates, what can we use, how can we use this in data enrich some of these categories that are coming in. It's like a living, breathing spreadsheet is the way I would describe Clay. That's great. But then there's going to be a next evolution of Clay. And so it's, what does that look like? So those companies always have to really be future thinking and future forward thinking in what they're doing to stay ahead of it. I don't know if I've truly answered your question in there. And so if you want to double click or just call me out and say, what are you really trying to say here? Go for it.
No, I think that's valid. I think, so I use this podcast to do what you were saying with taking multiple demos. Part of it is to create content, obviously, and collaborate with people. But part of it, I just learned about a lot of cool shit by talking to people who know what they're doing. So like last week, I had someone from Common Room on. I had never heard of them. They're like user gems plus a few other things. I would have never heard of them probably unless they targeted me, which they probably wouldn't, because I would say I'm slightly out of their ICP. So I think that's part of it as well, is do the demos, but also just expand what you're listening to, who you're talking to spot those opportunities. Because there's this curve with all new tech where if you think like Google Ads, if you were one of the first ones to get into Google Ads, you probably killed it and grew incredibly fast. But now it's at the point where everyone's using it. It's saturated. You're past that curve and it's on its way down. So that's
but good. At the same time, along that curve, there were inflection points where Google Analytics 3.0 came out or whatever. Yeah. And so Google Tag Manager was being used differently. So even there, it's just really about the curiosity of like where this world is headed. And I agree with you. I like love the idea of using a podcast. I'll check that out. I'll go see if that's a use case or a business case for what we're doing and how we can improve on our own process.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, I just get so much from the podcast, honestly, just listen to people talk and taking their ideas and learning. So I think that's a key point there. So one thing I wanted to have someone from QuotaPath on, I can't not talk about commission and sales structure and overall just how sales structure is changing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious that you mentioned consolidation on the tech side. There's also a lot of noise online of, AI is here. You only need 2 SDRs. You don't need 30 anymore. And your comp plan needs to change and they need to be. So I'm curious maybe what you've seen and what part of that you agree with and don't agree with on how sales structure is changing.
I think that's true with the SD. I have seen a lot of our own customers move their teams and shift. Now that might shift. Okay, we're going to de-emphasize SDRs because you mentioned user gems. That's actually a great example where you can take some of these AI tools and actually recreate user gems. So user gems would be a customer leaves one company A, they're a great customer, they go to a different company, and you do an outreach and like you hit them at the right timing, right? And like we can do that at QuotaPath without having to have an SDR, without actually even having to use a tool like User Gems to figure that out. So you are consolidating both roles and tech stacks in doing so. But as far as what I'm actually from seeing from a compensation standpoint, it's interesting, Dustin. It's actually gotten more complicated and more challenging. And when we started the company 6 years ago, I had this point of view of, okay, reps need to have visibility to their comp plans. That's what I ultimately, like, if you're actually trying to build a comp plan that is driving the right behaviors with the right incentives, then you need to align those two. And if you don't have visibility into how it actually works, then it's completely impossible and irrelevant if you're aligning those two, because the team doesn't truly understand. And so I was flummoxed. I'll use the word flummoxed. That's a word my grandmother uses. I was flummoxed at how many organizations out there purposefully made it confusing for their sales teams to understand how they got paid. And that was really the genesis of starting QuotaPath. What I've learned from this journey is that it is really difficult to change people's behavior. So a RevOps leader might say, they might come to QuotaPath with this problem. Everyone has this problem of comp and commissions. It's a pain point that you all out there have felt in your bones, that you show up and your team comes to you and says, Dustin, I don't understand my compensation plan. I don't understand. I think I got paid incorrectly. Even worse, in messing with someone's salary, sure, in sales, you have quota to OTE, you have a variable compensation, but at the end of the day, it's them getting paid. It's their salary. Is something that is really challenging because that will ultimately lead to distrust for that person. And I wouldn't doubt you have all dealt with someone actually leaving a company because they got paid incorrectly. So fixing that was problem A. And what we learned through that is that everyone has a special snowflake, and then we've had to build to these special snowflakes. And because we've pulled at all of the threads of comp plans, when we first started the company, we took 100 comp plans and we reverse engineered it. Cole, my co-founder, and I, who was my director of revenue operations at Trendkite, my previous company, we reverse engineered all these comp plans. We're still continuing to learn from our customers today. I think in a lot of ways, we're customer obsessed in just trying to better understand the different ways that they pay their teams. And in doing so, we've added level of complexity to QuotaPath that can be multi-level approval manager plans that are on a cumulative quota that roll up, that are multi-dependent on different earnings fields. And you're like, what does that even mean? And that's the reality of the situation, is that these admins show up and they don't even understand their own comp plan. So we try to help them start over, or at least demystify some of this, to give them a workflow management that I would categorize as ultimate compensation bliss or nirvana, but it doesn't always work out that way. So today, 6 years in, because we have a really large release the end of June. If you're watching this in July, we've already released it. That will be the last mile to this complex compensation management problem, and adds to this for companies that are scaling or moving pretty fast in their growth. We're going to help them in a major way this summer. So really excited about that. But it's still, commissions and comp as is something that is definitely challenging. And if you had told me 6 years ago, this is where we would be, I'd be like, oh, maybe there's some other problems to solve out there that might be more worthwhile. I don't know.
Yeah. So you mentioned everyone having their special little snowflake comp plan, essentially, that's unique. I always wonder this: as companies get to a certain size, is it a little bit of complexity for complexity's sake? You know what I mean? Is it actually necessary? Or is it, oh, we're growing, we're scaling, we got to change things, here's all the new variables, here's this super complicated thing I don't understand?
It happens organically, where you Frankenstein your comp plans together because you have so many stakeholders. You have finance, and then you have someone else coming in, maybe even from like HR. Oh, we need these MBOs. And people are like, what are MBOs? The CEO and the board might have an opinion. You raised a new round of funding and a new investor comes in and says, we need these roles. How does that fit into it? And before you know it, you've built a comp plan that you as a business don't even understand the cost of that comp plan. We saw all these earnings that just came out. Salesforce is at the top of that list of, oh, what's going on at Salesforce? Something that a friend of mine, David Spitz, wrote about on LinkedIn pretty recently was the cost of compensation plans, and that businesses aren't truly understanding what retention and the challenges they're having with customer retention are doing to comp plans, because you pay a higher dollar for dollar in new business comp plans. And when you're spending more in that area, your cost of acquisition, your CAC goes up, but that ultimately brings down the efficiency of the system. And that is being shown. So you had this like water level pretty high, if you could think of customer retention, as that lowers the rocks underneath, which are some of those costs that are being covered, are going to eat into your profitability as a business. So it's just fascinating to see how compensation and commission actually are playing a pretty big role in the public market today.
Yeah.
And people don't even realize it.
Also, you mentioned that it's harder to close a new customer. Acquisition costs are higher. Everything in marketing has got more expensive over the years at the same rate or higher as well. So it used to be Google ads, or even, I don't like advertising there personally, but like on Gartner, Terra, etc., cost for clicks have went up 3x.
They're radically higher, and the sales cycles slowing down means that those cost per clicks are even more costly to the business, and they're hidden costs for sure, because you're slowing down, higher costs, and all of that adds up to a demand problem that I heard Benioff talk on, I think it was on MSNBC 2 days ago, about what he was seeing in the demand for on a global level slow down. And what are they doing about it? They're becoming more efficient themselves. And so they're getting leverage out of their own business. And to do, what is he doing? Headcount is 80% of a software's business cost. He's going to lay people off. That's what he's really saying there. But he sells a per user pricing model to other companies. And then he himself is saying, we're going to lay people off.
Yeah.
So the people that sell to Salesforce are coming up against the same issues. So he's part of the problem at that. That just speaks volumes to where we are as an organization, or as an organization, if you think of the world as an organization, that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a cycle that is going to be tough to get out of until I think the interest rate problem gets solved. So I know we're not macroeconomists. We're not here to solve that problem, but you're just going to continue to hear about the same themes over and over again. And you'll see that in the next quarterly earnings, and we'll have more conversation about the exact same problem we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's been a total roller coaster since COVID in general, right? We probably still got a few more years to go here.
I think the roller coaster part of it is just that it's not today's world. COVID challenges are not last week's or 2 months ago or 3 months ago. So we point to COVID as the thing in the remote work and get tired of talking about it. Just a lot of founders and CEOs are tired of talking about Gen AI. That's the interesting part as well. We're more just tired of talking about the same things. And even this conversation, we're talking about it. I'm staring directly at a really nice camera. You're staring directly at a really nice camera. We miss those little nuanced personal interactions that we would have gotten had we been sitting on this couch right here next to me.
Yeah, maybe for the next one, we'll fly out and do it that way. I do want to ask one more, because we talked about last question here. So for Salesforce, they're their own beast, right? Like the amount of reps they have is more than most companies have as an entire headcount. And you mentioned this compensation or comp plan Frankenstein that kind of grows and gets unwieldy. There's no easy answer to this, but I'm curious, what do? Do you rip it down and start from scratch? Because that has its own a host of problems as well, of like scaling back comp or adjusting comp. How do you get out of this basically and get back to a level ground?
I think you're hitting on the right point, Dustin, which is taking a step back from the challenges that you're seeing and writing it down. The very first advice that I ever got on building and designing compensation was that it needs to fit on a napkin. And I remember hearing a really great story about Larry Ellis and Tom Siebel back at Oracle days. And Larry actually came in and they had a 75-page document that the reps had to sign for compensation. And he ripped it up and said, nope, it's going to be 1 page. Here it is. And that stuck with, and that you hear those themes throughout every organization that you just need to simplify. That's true in life of anything. So if you're struggling with it and you're in some level of a strategic position, or you're empowered to make changes to your compensation plans for your team, sit down and forget about what you've had and just like literally write down what you want the big rocks to be for what the right behaviors you want to incentivize, and start there and keep it simple. So yeah, you do throw it out and you do start over, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think keep it simple is a good one. I also think, just as someone on the revenue side, look at real data and real numbers to come up with targets is my other thing as well. Because we see a lot of, let's pick this random number here and that's your quota.
Stay tuned on our side. We have some big things coming this fall in the benchmarking side of the house to help leaders to really look at what is out there and what's working for other organizations. We have great data and fidelity around that, of course. We have 10,000 different organizations, and we understand intimately on how quotas and attainment work hand in hand to get the right behaviors and the right balance for the reps correctly, but also making the win-win for the organization.
Yeah, as someone who we use QuotaPath, and I'm the one who designs the plan, so I'll be keeping an eye out for that. But curious, AJ, people want to learn more, connect with you, learn more about QuotaPath. Where should they go for that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to connect me. It's like my only social platform these days. Everything else is just noise. But QuotaPath.com, and we have a free trial. So we've been a product-led organization. We have really good partnerships. We are announcing 2 major partnerships this fall with payroll providers. So be on the lookout for that as well. But HubSpot, and of course we integrate with Salesforce, NetSuite. We have, 60, 70 plus integrations these days, and all the payouts eligibility rules and ERP systems and accounting systems. It's a bit of a quagmire at times, but it's a quagmire that I've enjoyed the ride and the journey and wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So QuotaPath.com.
There we go. Perfect way to end it. AJ, thanks for joining me. Enjoyed that. For listeners, I'll include all those links and everything in the description.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is just that sometimes you need to rip out what you have and start from scratch when it comes to comp plans. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious how this comp plan Frankenstein gets created as you add new roles and you have to bounce comp between the roles and how they all interact. But at a certain point, it's really easy to lose track of how all the comp plans are related and the overall impact that it has on your business. Tools like QuotaPath help like this a ton, and they help you spot the problem. But sometimes the solution is just to go with simplicity once you've discovered the problem. If you enjoyed this episode, please head on over to wherever you listen to your podcast and click subscribe. And as always, I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode.